Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to another episode on Saints in Society. This is Rick, your host, and Brad, our co-host. Today we have a special guest with us, Todd Wermers from Man Ministries, and we're going to be discussing the topic of shame. I'm excited to dive in to discuss this topic. We hope that it's a blessing and a benefit for you guys. And at the end of this, we're going to give you guys some resources and some information. So if you would like to get in touch with Man, you can do that. But we're not going to do that till the end of this. So hang in there till the end, and then we'll give you guys all that information.
You're listening to Saints in Society, where we aim to equip saints to live in and engage with their society. We pray that through discussion and reading the Word, we can engage culture in its terms, but not on them. The gospel speaks to all of life and provides all the answers we seek. So let's apply the gospel to our lives, living as saints in society.
Okay, Brad, we have a guest on the show today with us, someone who's impacted both of us positively. I should clarify that. Someone who's been a positive impact, and it's Todd Wermers from Man Ministries. And so listeners, we're going to give you plenty of information on the back end of this about Man, so you guys can know how to reach out to them and connect with them. But let's share a little bit about Todd and the impact he's had on us. And so if you want, I can share first.
Sure.
And then
yeah,
you can dive in.
My story is really short, so Go for it.
Yeah. So I'll say this, Todd, you have this incredible gift, and I don't know if it's of discernment, wisdom, or what it is to look inside and almost be able to read someone's soul and what's going on in someone's soul. I remember the first time I had a conversation with you, I felt like you put words to what was going on inside of my soul better than I could put words to it. And I remember you were saying, like, do you feel like this, Rick? You feel like you need to bottle yourself up or hide yourself or not live out of who God created you to be because it would be like safer for other people and stuff like that. And I was just like, man, you were hitting the nail on the head. And so I believe that God has given you this incredible gift to be able to, just pinpoint what is going on inside people's souls. What it makes me think of, I don't know if you've ever seen the show The Mentalist, but there's a TV show called The Mentalist. And the guy makes fun of psychics because he says that there's no such thing as psychic. But what a mentalist does is they study people's behavior. And it's almost like you're kind of like a mentalist. Like you just kind of read the situation, study people's behavior and look at all that. And then it's like, boom, the shots come firing, and they're sniper shots that have been super accurate. And so I've been really blessed by you, thankful for you. And not just me, I'll speak on behalf of our church family, Gospel Community Church. Either you or other coaches from Man have been a huge blessing to many members in our church family. I know you've also been a huge blessing to our network, Acts 29, and a lot of the leaders there are incredibly grateful for you. And so, and Brad, I'll let you, because he kind of just, he had you pegged in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Oh my God.
maybe it wasn't that. But in all seriousness, because of your conversation, Todd, that you had with Brad, and we've done a podcast on Brad's struggle with pornography. But because of that conversation, whether you realize it or not, led to Brad confessing sin to me, and then like everything opening up, and then a ton of healing that's happened since then. So I'll let Brad share.
Yeah, I mean that's.
I'm just going to steal it all.
That's basically it. But my guess is that a lot of men who have that intake conversation with you, the conversation goes a lot like the one that we had. That's not taking away from your mentalist abilities, but yeah, in the matter of it, when I got hired at GCC, the elders wanted me to do some counseling, not because they thought I had any problems, or maybe they did, but it was more just like a general health checkup. And Todd does the intake meetings for Man Ministries, and so in like a 15-minute Zoom call, I shared a few like kind of vague things about myself, and he peered right through it all and was able to call out what was really going on. So that opened the door, like Rick said, to all kinds of healing, in my life and marriage. And I think we could say the extension of that, even through this podcast and just other people getting to hear that story, has been really impactful. So I don't think I ever got to say thank you, Todd, but thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I've been called a lot of things. So I'll take the mentalist as a compliment. But I've got a group of guys. All of us in our circle, somehow, some way, one day they went around the room, the circle, and said, "Hey, let's become Marvel characters." And so the group, I did not call myself this, I don't claim this, they call me Doctor Strange, because Doctor Strange can move things and see things. So to be called a mentalist, yeah, that's a compliment. And
There you go.
we are super grateful here at Tin Man for your church and what you guys are doing. And that we even get the honor to come alongside your men and women to help them find their hearts and kind of go back and do what God's called them to do. So we don't take it for granted that you guys have given us that opportunity to walk with your staff and your lay people. So it's a huge honor to even get to be here on this call and to get to serve your church. So
Thanks, man.
So thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Todd, will you give our listeners a little information about yourself, like an ESPN highlight of who Todd is and a little bit about your role? Because I see now that your role has shifted on Tin Man. You are now the president. So
I'm the CEO, president, the chief overseer. Yeah.
Congrats on that. The only thing I would say to our listeners is don't put too much thought into Todd's picture on the website. I know it looks like a serial killer's mugshot, but Todd is an awesome guy. And so maybe one day that'll be updated. So, but Todd, you can fire back at that too.
That's a tactic we use at Tin Man, to keep that picture up there, because people that keeps people away from wanting to actually see me. So we keep
smart.
that picture up there. Like, hey, we want to see the rest of the team. We don't want to see that guy.
That's a brilliant tactic.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Todd, your background, degree, Tin Man, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I've been at Tin Man 6 years now, going on 6 years. My role here is the president. I just got that role here at the first of the year. But prior to Tin Man, I was a youth pastor, teaching pastor at a church in Southwest Florida. My life kind of blew up, kind of the same story that Brad has. And that all came to the surface 3 years into my marriage. And out of that, I got sent to a 90-day rehab facility where God used that a lot. And we'll talk about this a whole lot on this podcast. It's about the power of shame and what it will do to a man or a woman. Came out of that and had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I had lost my job, was cutting grass. And out of that, God, through my wife, Jenny, I'm married. And I have 2 kids. I have a 13-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, Cedar. So Tennyson and Cedar, and then my wife, Jenny. Came out of that and had no idea what I was going to do, but I had some mentors and Jenny speak into my life, saying I had some gifts, some talents, what you guys said, and said, hey, you need to go back to school. So I ended up going back to school after my Bible college degree. I have a master's in marriage and family therapy from the University of Tribeca right here in Nashville. And then my hope was to just take and help mental health inside the local church. That was my goal. I got out of school and had enough head knowledge without enough practical experience in the workplace, and thought, man, I'll be super dangerous in the church. So I ended up working at a rehab center. The hope was to work there for a year and then go back into the local church where I came from. But God had other plans and kept me at the rehab center for about 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, I just felt like God was calling me to something else. And that's kind of how I ended up here at Tin Man. I'm still a local pastor at a small church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Literally right behind me is our local church. So I'm a senior pastor at a small Baptist church. I love the local church. The local church for us, for me and for Tin Man, is the hope of the world. Tin Man's not the hope of the world.
Amen.
So this isn't a dog any other parachurch. Most parachurches operate, hey, how can the church serve us? And our goal here at Tin Man is how do we serve the church? Tin Man is not the hope of the world. We want to help the church, but we realize the job that you guys on this call have, and whoever will listen, that is the hope of the world. And so we want to come along and serve the body. It's really to get men and women well and get them back in the local church to serve the Lord and serve his people. So that's kind of who I am, what I do. You bleed me. I'm not going to bleed counseling. I'm not going to bleed therapy. I will bleed the church. Awesome. I love the local body. So that's another reason why I still serve at our local level. I don't want to ever get away from that. So that's kind of who I am, what I do.
Awesome.
And why I do what I do. There's a lot more story around that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into some of that. So thanks. That was super helpful, super encouraging about your perspective on the local church.
Mm-hmm.
And as we stated in the intro, today's topic is shame. And so we're going to be talking about shame, and we'll just jump right in with that. Todd, can you give a working definition of shame? And then the follow-up question, since we are relational beings, how does shame impact our relationships?
Yeah. So shame, again, it's an acronym that I believe is so helpful. I did not come up with this. I would give credit to where credit's due. I don't know where it's due. So shame would say, I should have already mastered everything. So there's this internal thing in us that thinks we need to have all the answers at all time. And that's really what drives us, is that place of shame. It's really a place of not wanting to experience our true humanity, being limited. So, and you see that way back at the garden. That's basically what happened in the garden, where the serpent came to Adam and Eve, and he's challenging their humanity and says to them, hey, you can actually be like God. You don't actually have to be human. You want to be like God? You be like God. You just eat this fruit. And they eat it and they realize, well, man, that has jacked us up. And, it says in that passage, they were naked and unashamed. As soon as they ate the fruit, they became shameful. And they became shameful of their humanity, of recognition of their limitations, recognition of like, oh, wait, we're actually not like God. We're never going to be like God. Only God has already mastered everything. He is sovereign and in control and all powerful. And yet there is something in us that drives us to want to do that. I think that happened at the fall. So it's in all of us. Shame is in all of us. It started at the fall. We'll carry that all the way to our grave. So I'll say it that way. The other question you asked, and I'll answer it through, his name is John Bradshaw. He's kind of the guru, the godfather of shame. He says this about shame. Shame limits the development of self-esteem and causes anxiety and depression, and limits our ability to connect in relationships. So if you think about that, shame, and I can read it again if you want.
Yeah, go ahead and read it one more time. Man, there's a part of me that doesn't want you to read it one more time. Go ahead and read it one more time.
It's like, that's me.
Yeah.
So shame limits the development, or toxic shame is his exact word. So think toxic shame, unhealthy, like the unhealthy part of toxic shame limits the development of self-esteem and causes both anxiety and depression. Anxiety is I got to be in control. Depression is I'm just going to go away.
Yeah.
Right. So it causes both anxiety and depression. Therefore, it limits our ability to connect in relationships. So our shame limits our relational capacity and relational connection.
So explain how that plays out a little bit more, and how you've seen it play out more in people that you have coached. So in marriages, in relationships, in friendships, in friendships and relationships within the local church. So yeah, maybe start with marriages if that's the easiest point, or parenting, or one of those. How have you seen it really impact and play out? And I'm sure you could talk on that for hours, but.
Yeah, so I think when you deal with shame and it limits our relationships, what it's limiting is my willingness to be vulnerable and human with another person, because I don't really want to be exposed in my limitations. So I'm going to have to put up a facade it's again what Adam and Eve did in the garden. They covered themselves with, fig leaves. Well, they were trying to cover their shame. And so we will do that. We have our own form of fig leaves. So I don't really want you to see me in my humanity. I don't really want you to see me in my limitations. I don't really want you to see me for how God created me. So I'm going to give you an external view of who I am. That's a covering of who I am. And therefore, because of that, because I don't want to be human, I'm now going to start hating my own humanity. So now my hatred is going internal. Well, if I have self-hatred, it's going to be really hard for me to receive love from another human being. Because if I don't love myself, then I'm not going to believe it when you start to love me. Or the flip side of that coin is, because I don't love myself, I'm going to want you to love me so much, because that well will never, I have a hole in my chest that it doesn't matter how much love you give me, because I don't believe it, it's just going to flow right out of me. It's not going to fill me. So both can be true. I'll either like push you away from it because I won't believe it, or I'll try to get so much of it from you, but it's never enough. So that's kind of how it happens. It happens in marriages. Again, the contextual word would be this. If you ever went to grad school, they'll say historically in marriages, there's one that pursues and one that runs. Well, or there's another way to put it this way, and you may have heard this before. It's the theory of attachment. So attachment would say there's 4 theories of attachment. We'll just talk about 2 of them right now. But either you get really anxious in your attachment, and the anxiousness is, man, I can't get enough of this. So my anxiousness says I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more because I don't have enough of it. Or you go to avoidant, like, man, I don't want any of that because I don't trust it, I don't believe it, and it like get away from me. Because the closer you get to my humanity, the more I get exposed. So I'm going to push you away. So in relationships, the closer I become, the more I'm exposed in my humanity. So this is who I am as a human. Like the way in my own story of my own shame is I'm more avoidant in my relationships than anxious in my relationships. So,
okay. So with your own story and with your own marriage, then, so it's not in theory, how did your own shame impact your marriage? And I don't know if when you were going through all that, if you had kids at that point or didn't have kids, but how did you see it impact your parenting as well?
Yeah, thank God when I began to deal with my shame at the core, I was newly married 3 years, no children. So thank God for that. So my journey, we'll use the word recovery. My own journey of recovery has kind of helped protect my kids from my own shame.
Yeah.
They don't have to wear my shame the way I did with my parents. So, I mean, again, it still played out. I'm not perfect in that. But in my marriage, how my shame played out was if you get too close to me and you really get to know me, then you really actually won't want to be with me. So what I did with Jenny was played the emotion. I call it the emotional Heisman. So I kept my shame close and I kept everyone at pretty much arm's length. Now, how that played out relationally was this. Jenny said, you have 1,000 people that think they know you, but they don't have any knowledge of you at all. So she said, you have 1,000 friends and no friends at all. So a lot of people thought they knew me and thought they had a relationship with me, but they had no idea who I was because I was hiding my shame. Now that started way back when I was a child. And that started when I was abandoned at an airport by my parents at 15 years old. And in that moment, I remember feeling this feeling. And I said it out loud to my older brother, whatever I have to do not to feel this again, I will do. Well, that place was abandonment. The place was like, I'm not going to feel this. And what it exposed was, man, my parents don't really like my humanity. If they like my humanity, they want to keep me around. Now, again, I'm 15. I don't have that cognitive awareness of what's happening. But I'm like, man, I didn't look externally at it. Like, what's wrong with these 2 humans that dropped me off at an airport that don't want me? I looked internally like something clearly must be wrong with me, that these 2 people that are supposed to love me are going to leave me at an airport. Therefore, I'm not ever going to let my humanity be known to the world, which drove me 2 places. It drove me high levels of performance. Again, that's how at 27 years old, I'm a teaching pastor at a massive church because I could perform. But my performance was to get people away from me, not really to get people near me. Now, it looked like people were drawing near to me, but I'm like, if I just perform, these people won't leave me. So that's kind of how it's played out in my life. That's played out in my marriage, too. So now there's a part of it in my marriage. I'm like, man, if I'm not careful, and you guys covered this on another podcast, my performance will become an idol. And that idol will be, I got to perform for Jenny so Jenny sticks around. Yeah. I can't really be Todd with Jenny. I got to be who I think she wants me to be for her. And that doesn't end. That never ends well.
Yeah. Brad, I don't want to hog the questions.
Okay,
so
I got one.
I'll let, okay, perfect. Yeah, I've heard a saying, you've probably heard it too, Todd, but even what you described is someone who is well known, but not known well.
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. You mentioned, so all humans have some type of shame. We all experience the limitations of our humanity, but it seems like and you just gave an example, there's things in our story and oftentimes in our childhood that maybe amplify that or heighten that sense of shame. So is there benefit? And I think the answer is going to be yes. And then what is that benefit? What's the benefit to exploring maybe the source of shame from childhood, whether that be trauma or the relationship with your parents? And is there a balance between spending too much time in the past and not moving forward? That's maybe a question for later. But what's the benefit of exploring the sources of our shame going back to childhood?
Again, the way we at Tin Man think of humans, every human is kind of the same. I mean, it's true of all of us. So we think of this way, like all of us have been born in the Imago Dei. Like we have been created in the image of God. Like every human being, believer or unbeliever, there's something. And again, I know there's a sinful nature about us. I believe that to be true. But there is also a God image attached to that sinful nature. Both are true simultaneously. But because of how we view ourselves, the image of God, we do come into the world with some level of ego. Like I come into the world assuming that these two people in my life are going to care for me. Again, that is it called ego, right? So I have that belief. Like at the core, when I come into the world, I really do believe somebody's going to care for me. Somebody loves me. Somebody's going to nurture me. Somebody's going to provide for me. I have that core. Well, this is what we know to be true about every human being again on the planet, no matter how great your parents are or how bad your parents are. Because we live in a fallen, broken world, we have sinful parents. And in our sinful parents and how we've been raised, we all of us have lived with some level of broken relationship. Well, broken relationship does feel like abandonment. Like it does feel that way. Now, some of us have been more abandoned than others. Like some of us like, man, that like someone listens to my story, like that's abandonment. You got dropped off at an airport. Well, there's other places, and this is what Dan Allen talks about, small T trauma, which is like small places of brokenness. But if that place of brokenness is never mended, if the rupture happened but there's no repair, that then becomes trauma. So all of us are going to go through traumatic events, as he says, but the traumatic events don't have to become trauma events. They don't have to lead to ongoing rupture. But if they do, that's abandonment. And what happens in abandonment is I begin to look internal, what's wrong with me, rather than external and say, what's wrong with y'all? And so the point of doing the story is to go back to do story work to say, and again, it's what you guys are doing so beautifully. Let me take the gospel into those places and retell the story from a gospel-centered place to bring healing to the abandonment. So what we would say is this: we don't want to blame our parents for anything that's been done to us or blame them for our actions that have come out of that. But what we do want to do is take the gospel and name what happened to us. So in naming what happened to us, the gospel can heal those places rather than continue to build off of places of blame. We're going to now name it rather than blame it, but we're going to name it with the gospel, and the gospel will bring healing to those places.
So your gospel identity that you have in Christ as being a child of God even gives you the safety and security to even lean into or step into some of those circumstances, right?
Yeah, amen, 100%.
Yeah, okay.
Because for me, as a gospel guy, as a Christ follower, I do need a parental figure to go back into that space where the child was harmed. So the secular world will say, hey, again, this is John Bradshaw's kind of thinking, like all of us have the inner child. So now, therefore, as adults, we can go care for the inner child. I believe that's true. But I also believe what's missing in the secular world is like, no, we do have a father, God, that can walk with us as even we go, and God with the gospel can reparent that child that was abandoned. But I think we're so limited. And that's where the secular world, the secular counseling is limited in that place because they're not bringing the God of the universe and the Father of the universe to care for the child as we care for the child. That's just my own opinion. That's my own soapbox. I could get on that and talk for hours.
Super good.
So I think secular society and secular marketplace counseling is missing it because there is the God of the universe. And here's the deal. Because he's the God of the universe and we've been marked with his identity, wouldn't you want to take the one that gave us that identity to tell us hey, this is who you are. This is how I made you. I don't know how I made me, but there's a God of the universe that made me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the creator of my own life and let him recreate me by retelling me the story that's really true about me.
It's good. Okay. What are some coping mechanisms, Todd? So even as you were saying, hey, here's how shame impacts relationships, and you gave two examples. It can be a strong pushing someone away, or it can be a strong pulling someone in. And both of those, it's never going to be enough because you actually don't believe what someone's telling you. And so how else do people cope with shame?
So what happens with shame, this is so our line of thinking here, Tin Man, goes, you got this center core, the Imago Dei. Out of the Imago Dei comes, we live in a fallen, broken world. Out of that fallen, broken world, we're going to tell a false narrative about what happened to us. That's where we would say shame or toxic shame comes into. Like, I got to make up this story about all these places of abandonment that may or may not be true so I can survive. That's what we're meant to do, is survive. So now I live in this place of toxic shame, giving a narrative of the world around me because I want to stay safe. That's the human heart. That's the human brain. We want to be safe. So I want to have to retell a story for me to be safe. What comes out of that is because we know that's not how God wired us or created us, with that toxic shame. So now I'm going to move into how am I going to use relationships to retell the narrative. So I'm going to either move into, that's where we would say is independency or codependency. Independency is, I don't need anybody. I can do this on my own. I will do this on my own. I got this. Codependency says, man, I don't got this, but if I don't have you, then I really don't have this. So therefore, codependency says, I got to make sure you're okay, because if you're okay, then I'm okay. So now I'm going to work really hard to make sure everyone around me stays okay, but I'm not paying to myself attention. The other flip side of that coin is independency. Like, man, I don't want anything to do with any of y'all, because if you get near me, you're going to harm me, which isn't true either. So we either push or pull in that way. Out of that ultimately comes this, because we know God's made us for a relationship. We then go to, and this is beautifully what you guys said, I look forward to listening to the podcast. This is where we would say idolatry comes from, ultimately, for us here at Tin Man. Idolatry simply says this: I know I'm made for relationships. I'm not made for independency. I'm not made for codependency. And I don't have the energy to stay away from people, but I don't have the energy either to stay this codependent with people. So I need some external force, external thing to fuel my independency and to fuel my codependency. That's where addiction, idolatry comes from.
That's good.
So now I've taken something external to fill something internal. And that's what we know idolatry is. Idolatry is saying, I'd rather believe the creation rather than the creator. That's ultimately what idolatry is. So we would say this: idolatry can happen in these forms and many other. You got depression, and that can be an idol, because it's like, man, depressed people are powerful people. You ever been around a depressed person? It's like, man, they control the room.
That's true.
Or it can come through anxiety. Like that anxious energy is the way I'm going to fuel myself to continue to give my fuel for the codependent or independent relationships. Then the massive ones are addiction, workaholism, alcoholism, sex addiction. That's where we would say the classic addiction place comes into play. But addiction is, again, just the ultimate form for me, the ultimate form of idolatry. Because I now, man, that and here's what y'all know: idolatry. It says, man, for a short time, it really is answering the question to my heart, but it leaves me wanting more. So, and this is what so this is the first definition I gave you about shame.
Yep.
The front half of that definition is what is it? It says shame is the motivator behind all of our toxic behaviors, the compulsions, the codependency, the addictions, and the drive to superachieve that breaks the family and destroys personal lives. Shame, limits the development of self-esteem, causes anxiety, depression, and limits our development or our ability to connect in relationships. So that's the front half of that definition.
I have so many
So
questions.
do I. This
Now I'm not even asking for listeners, but
this might be a rabbit hole that we don't have to go down, and you can shut me down
Okay.
here. But I think that perspective on anxiety and depression is very interesting and probably different than how most people view depression or anxiety. I think as like the external coping mechanism, I think most people, and maybe this is a false assumption, would assume that the depression or anxiety is more at the center of that circle, that it would be like on par with shame, like I struggle with shame and depression and anxiety. But you guys are saying that no, that's actually an outworking of the shame. That I don't know if I have a question. I guess my question is maybe say more about that. Like, is that an uncommon view of depression, anxiety?
Well, let me kind of couch what I like. I believe there is clinical depression.
Sure. Yep. Okay.
But I'm not talking about that. And I believe there's clinical anxiety.
Yep.
Like go see a doctor, a professional.
Yep.
Most of what we see is not that.
Okay.
And I mean, even as a clinician, most of what is diagnosed as depression, anxiety is like very, very small number of those people. What we would say here about anxiety is this. Anxiety at its core is fear. And my anxiety is, man, I've got to control everything, because if I don't control everything, then I'm going to be exposed to other people. So I've got this high level of being in control, but my control is really just a protective mechanism to my shame. So I stay really, really anxious and in control, not to be exposed. Depression is, man, I'm not the same kind of level. Depression. So again, and you can read this in Dr. Chip Dodd's book, Voice of the Heart. This is where we get this idea from. He would say undiagnosed or chemical related depression is just a place of what you and I would think of as suppression. So depression, like I've got something going on in me, which we would say is anger. That's where depression comes from. Is I got something that's in me, I want it out of me. But if I let that out of me, and anger, if I let the anger, and when we say anger, passion, desire, like, man, what makes me alive? If I let that out of me, that's a really exposing place. So for me to show up and be me 100%, my fear and anxiety say I can't do that. Therefore, I'm going to have to depress who I am, not to be exposed for who I am. So then I go into depression. So my depression is, again, just a coping mechanism, not for exposure, the same way anxiety is. It's a coping mechanism around being exposed for how God created me.
Do people feel like they can maintain a position of power or control through depression? So if you are just a mopey person, like, can people use something like that to just maintain power? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you said the depressed person in the room is the most powerful person in the room. So do people learn to just stay in that spot so that it keeps them safe and it keeps others at bay? Or like, I don't. So
think of, I think who got this the best is Winnie the Pooh. Like Eeyore. Yeah. Think about Eeyore. Like Eeyore, when Eeyore shows up in the show changes. And all those characters start molding and shaping and trying to like move around Eeyore. Eeyore is the most powerful dude on that little cartoon. And that's true for humans. If you've ever been around a true, like, I don't mean like, hey, that dude needs medicine for his medication. Think about a teenager, a depressed teenager, like, oh gosh, man, those are the hardest clients for me to treat. They are the hardest because they come into my office, they don't give a rip what I have to say. And they can literally outweigh me, which is, I'm not saying I'm like the guru, but I'm like, man, this kid doesn't give two rips. And so now I'm trying to work harder than he's willing to work. And he's just like, yeah, whatever. Like, okay.
Gotcha. Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's helpful. Let me ask this. So you have two guys here, and I'm going to put us in categories.
Okay.
I'm going to say the way that I deal with shame is more of an independent approach. The way you deal with shame is more of a codependent approach. Would you agree with that? Okay. So help us, Todd. So how do you walk with someone who is struggling with shame and it's coming through and being overly independent? How do you walk with someone who's struggling with shame who's being overly codependent? And so how do both people coming from two different sides move toward health? Like what is the tactic or approach for the overly independent and for the overly codependent?
Guys like you and me, Rick, I've got to come to a place of like, man, I've got to show up and be honest about how needy I am. So my neediness is going to lead me into relationship. So I've got to show up and I've got to say, man, I really don't want this relationship. I don't really need this relationship, but the gospel tells me I must have this relationship. I am in great need of a relationship. So that's at the simplest core. Like relationships for the codependent is this. I'll be okay without that relationship. So it's the flip side to the same coin. Like, again, Brad's going to have to tell himself, like, I'm going to be okay. In his internal world, he does not think he's going to be okay unless everyone else around him is okay. So what he has to do is let other people have feelings about him that he doesn't have to go manage. You and I are like, man, screw it. I don't want to manage anybody's feelings. I don't even want to have feelings myself.
Yeah.
So I have to be willing to let myself have feelings first. And Brad's going to have to allow other people to have feelings about him. Because you and I are like, man, you don't care. Like, again, I know this isn't true, but it's like, okay, you have feelings about me, deal with it. Screw you.
Mm-hmm.
That would drive Brad up the wall and he would go mad. Like you and I get energized when people are pissed off at us. Brad, again, this is hyperbole. I know this is not always true, but Brad's like, oh my gosh, what do I have to do? Like he gets a phone call from you, his boss. I guarantee his automatic response is, what have I done wrong? And his like unhealthiness.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are like, oh, you want to fight? Let's go.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, you call me? Let's go. We don't go to like, oh man, what did I do? What did I not do? How am I going to fix this? What am I going to do? We're like, let's go.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Is that helpful? That makes sense?
Helpful, incredibly.
So inaccurate. It's great. I mean, like.
So far off, Todd, it's not even funny.
The goal of this wasn't to expose us, Todd. Come on, man.
We're asking for our friends. It's for our friends.
Yeah.
I would say that is 100% accurate. And he nailed it.
I would 100% agree with that.
You guys are watching the mentalist at work in real time.
Yeah.
And know this, for all of us, there's certain times and spaces I'm going to be way more codependent with Jenny. But so some of those relationships I have, like, it's not like every relationship I'm independent. There's other times like I can fall into that, but as a general rule, I'm not falling into much codependency.
Yeah.
So again, Rick, I'm sure there's times with the Allie, you're like, oh, what did I do something wrong? Her voice, like you walk into the house, you're like, oh man, what did I do? Like I get that piece. Like I'm not saying every time, but and there's gonna be a time for you, Brad, that you're like, I don't give a rip.
Yeah.
My wife would say, so the reason why I know what you said was accurate is because what you said scares me is that I don't even want to say the word needy or that I am needy. And so my wife in 13 years of marriage would say the thing that I have done over the course of 13 years that has made her feel the most hurt and disconnected is that she feels around me, and others have said this, is that I don't need her and I don't need anyone.
Right.
And so when you say to tell people that I need them or that I'm needy, I'm like, well, that scares me to even say those words. So let me ask this. What does that really practically look like relationally? Because and I'm sure other listeners want to get helpful. Does it mean like sitting down and me in front of Brad and going, Brad, I need you.
And me saying, Rick, I don't need you.
and then we don't know where to go from there. We're like, all right, man. Well, I feel like we're on the right track. So how does that kind of play out relationally in our relationships inside of the local church? So, there's, some guys that recognize, yeah, Todd, you hit the nail on the head. I'm overly independent. Or there's some group of women right now that are listening going, Todd, you hit the nail on the head. I'm overly codependent. But I don't just want to grow in my relationship with my spouse, but I want to grow in my relationships with other people inside of the church. And it seems like my shame is hindering me from doing that. So what do really practical steps look like?
So again, I'll say it this way. There's got to be in the church, a local body. We've got to help people come to a true place of what we would say is admission. Can we live in what you and I would call confessional communities? So am I going to live with what's going inside with your outsides? That's what confession is. I'm going to bring what's going on in me outside of me. So right? That's the first place of admission or confession. Well, after that is going to come this place of like, okay, like because of that, I am now going to give you attention. I'm going to attend to your confession, which means I'm going to let you know, even in your confession, that you matter and belong. So I think you and I are going to have to practice a whole lot of confession. And that doesn't necessarily mean sinfulness. I don't mean that, but it's like, man, I've got to be aware of, man, when do I get lonely? And when do I get sad? And when do I get hurt? And because as much as I don't want to admit it, people do hurt my feelings. As much as I don't want to admit, I do get lonely with people. I have to admit that to people. So I've got to pay attention to my feelings and admit that out loud. And then I have to have people around me that will like validate what I'm feeling. So that's okay. You matter and you belong. You're right. That would hurt. That would be lonely, right? Which will lead to this place of attunement. So now, not only am I confessing it or admitting it, not only is someone attending to my admission, now someone is actually tuning into my heart, who I am as a person. Dan Allender says this about this idea. He says, this bond that we're creating through admission and attention is going to lead to me coming to this place that knows that you really are there for me and you truly do know me. So that's called what we would call attunement. Well, if I have attunement, then it'll lead me to attachment. So think about when I tune into a radio station, I'm not going to be able to attach to the music unless I'm tuned into the music. So I have to have people that tune into my emotions, therefore can attach to my emotions. So it goes back to, man, am I being the one that's leading through admission that they can even attach to? That's what, people around you and me are saying. Like, man, you don't ever really bring confession. So therefore, I can't really attach to you. I can't really attune to you. I can't really be with you because you really don't need me.
And when I do, it feels like it's been a bottled up thing. And so it comes out as a whole lot for people. And maybe Brad could say that's accurate. But I think underneath all that is that I'm longing for it and hoping that somehow someone else is going to do it and step into it and bridge that gap for me. But in essence, what I'm hearing is that like I have to take steps to lean into people.
That's right.
Because I am going, man, hope someone sees that like I do want this, or I want someone to pursue me in this way, but it's going to be more vulnerable for me to pursue in that way.
So the flip side of that coin will be Brad. Brad's going to do that with everybody. And Brad's going to do that with everyone, hoping that everyone will attach to him because he doesn't feel like his needs are getting met. So he's got this anxiousness about, or this scarcity of resources emotionally. Therefore, he's going to have to over confess to people. That's generalization. I'm not saying that's 100% true, accurate. That's how this kind of plays out.
Would that look like self-deprecation and like often making jokes or talking bad about yourself so that people you're almost like talking about your failures or weaknesses? Yeah.
You're asking for a friend?
Yeah, hypothetically speaking.
That is awesome. Which ultimately will lead to what we would say is the last one, which we call this alignment. Like we do need correction in our lives. Like, man, I do need someone in my life to be like, hey, man, like, hey, that, like if I'm leading confession, I do need someone to be like, man, hey, you can't keep doing that over and over again. That's not healthy behavior. Like that's correction. What happens though, and we've seen this, this is where the church butchers it. The church wants everyone to confess, but they want everyone to get their behavior right. But they're not willing to do the middle 3 A's. Because the middle 3 A's take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort, and it gets really messy really fast. So we're trying to go from, hey, confession to get your life straight. We wouldn't say it that way, but if we're honest, that's how we say it. Again, this is what most churches do. A guy like me, I fall in ministry. And this is the beauty of what you guys did. And Brad, this is the beauty of what this church did for you. Most guys come with that level of confession. They're going to send you away to go get help. And you may never get brought back into the fold. Like, hey, you're like, man. So for my story, most guys in my position, they confess to what I confess to, that level of sin. they would have gotten rid of me, but they would have wanted me to go get my life right, but they wouldn't have done the legwork of like, hey man, like paying attention to me, attuning to me, attaching to me, mattering. So fast forward in that whole story, that church that fired me because of my addiction, 2.5 years later, rehired me, reordained me, let me be a preaching, teaching pastor again, and let me help lead a recovery counseling ministry in our church. I'm like, man, that's the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That is what we're called to do. But it does start with you and I think James 5 says it the best, like, hey, telling yourself, pray for one another so you can get healing. That takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long-winded answer. Sorry to take.
No, that's good. How do you approach someone, Todd, who it's pretty evident that shame is mastering their lives, but if you need to challenge them or approach them or talk to them, it seems like, man, that's just something that's just going to enhance their shame all the more. It's something that's going to cripple them. It's going to lead them to more despair. And so it's almost like, how do we as pastors, how do we as friends, how do we as, people invested in other people's lives approach someone that we can see is struggling with some of these things and know that what they need is actually deeper, intimate friendships and whatnot. But it seems like any sort of approach to someone just immersed in shame is just going to possibly cripple them all the more.
So what everyone that's struggling with shame needs is someone to come alongside them. What we would call this the attunement piece, to let them know they matter and they belong. And what their shame is telling them is not true about them. So that's kind of the underpinnings of it all. How you do that, the practical piece of that is get to know the person's story, to know what's driving the shame. Because you'll want to speak to the shame, but you won't be able to speak to the core where it's coming from. And shame is going to be more powerful than you or I put together. But if I can get behind it to the root of the shame, where's this shame narrative coming from? Then we can have true healing. A lot of times what happens is we keep picking the fruit of the shame, like, oh, their behavior. Like shame does produce poor behavior, right? Bad behavior. And it's very obvious. You can see it. So most people are going to want to tackle that behavior. And then they're baffled by, well, how come it keeps producing fruit? It's like, well, you didn't get to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is, hey, let's go figure out what happened to cause this shame so they can tell the truth to the shame. You can't tell truth to the behavior. You got to tell truth to the shame. So that's how.
Is that why sometimes, and I, and I know I do this to other people too, so maybe other people feel this way about me, but is this why sometimes in relationships, I feel like I'm, with certain people, I feel like I'm just hitting a wall and can't actually ever get to know them or break past that? It seems like there's such a high wall or guard or something up to where like we never break past that. Would you say that even running into something like that could be an indicator of, hey, there's shame or there's part of their story that's led them to putting up this wall or guard or something like that? Does that make sense, Brad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you feel like you've run into people where it's like, man, I'm just bumping up into something that doesn't let us go much beyond all surface,
Yeah. I'm curious what Todd would say. My guess is that wall would be put up because of shame, right? Like they don't want you to get close or to the things that would expose them. But say it smarter than me, Todd.
Well, again, when
I'm sure you've experienced that with people.
Yeah, sitting here in this seat, most people are coming to us because their life isn't working. And like no one's like, hey, I'm signing up for Tim, man. My life is working. So for me, it's probably a little bit easier than for y'all.
Yeah.
Only because like people are coming to us for help.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as I'm like, hey man, let's deal with your shame, they're like, oh, finally, like, oh, thank God. Like, oh, you named it, you labeled it, like gives them freedom to expose. So with y'all, it's like having to help them see what they're doing. And so it really is like letting them know what it's like for you to be with them, how lonely it is to be with them, how hurt it is to be. Like, it's like they're going to have to keep hearing the same story over and over. And then the last thing is this, like, there's often times for us that we have to concede to shame. Like shame, like, okay, like shame wins. Like, if not, you might as well just take a nail, put it in the wall, and use your forehead to drive that nail through the wall. Like it feels that way often. So sometimes, like, all right, man, like come back when life isn't working. Like clearly your life is working. I know your life isn't working. It's obvious the day is long, but in their own shame, their pride, they think life is working. It's like, I'm not going to fight harder for someone's shame than they're willing to fight. If they think their life is working and they don't think they have shame, like, okay, like, you're going to be lonely as all get out. And I'm going to go spend my time and energy on other people that are willing to be human with me. But you're not willing to be human.
That's good.
So you wear two like interesting hats, obviously the Tin Man hat, but also
I
the
didn't know what you were going to say.
the senior pastor hat. And I really, really appreciated what you said at the very beginning about like your love for the local church. So I'm just curious, like, what do you as a senior pastor do to try to
That's good.
Incorporate, you used the word confessional communities. Like, how do you incorporate all of this other knowledge that you have about shame and emotions and the Tin Man type stuff into the local body in a way that doesn't distract from the gospel, but actually helps people heal and walk, and walk through healing and sanctification, all that kind of stuff. Like as a senior pastor, where does all this kind of stuff touch down?
For me, it happens through my preaching. I don't mean this again because I'm bivocational. I don't have a lot of opportunities to be one-on-one with my people. I'm doing another job. So my preaching comes through that. So I'm looking for really strategic ways through the passage to say, hey, how does this relate to us as humans? So an example, this past Sunday, I just taught on shame. I taught on shame through Exodus chapter 3, verse 11. Now, when you first come, and I'm not saying I'm great at this, so this is not like pat Todd on the back, but I think I've been doing this work long enough that I can take Moses and see him as a patient. I can take Paul and see him as a patient. Like, again, they're humans. They're like you and me. The only one you're not going to do this with is Jesus. Mm-hmm. He's perfect when it comes to the emotions. Mm-hmm. You can do it other places with other people. So I took Exodus. I'm teaching the book of Exodus 10 through 15. You look at the passage where Moses is called by God to go deliver the Israelites. And he says to God in that burning bush, basically, who do you think I am? I can't do this. Well, that's not Moses' humility. That's his toxic shame. We see that toxic shame later on. He's like, I can't even talk. I can't even speak. You're going to have to send somebody else. And that's where I'd come back to, well, what does the gospel say? The gospel says, okay, God does not address Moses with, hey, you have the best education you ever had. You grew up as the second in command of all the known world, so you've got the leadership abilities. Oh, that's your first 40 years of your life. Like, I was preparing you for that. He didn't say that to him. He doesn't say, hey, look at these last 40 years. You're wandering in the desert, the very desert that you're going to take these people out. So you totally know this geography. He doesn't say any of that to him. What does he say to him in the next passage, right? He says next to him, hey, knucklehead, I'm with you. I got you in this. So yeah, that's true about whatever you think is true, but I'm going to do it with you. And that's where you intersect the gospel into people's shame. It's like, okay, you're right. And again, shame is not a bad thing unless shame limits our ability to see ourselves, and therefore it limits us to see God. So my shame limits me to see who I am, both my gifts and my limitations. But when I walk with the Lord's like, yeah, those things are true about you, but these things are true about you. But what's more true about you, I'm with you in your shame. And it's like, oh, therefore I get needy with God because of my shame. My shame, when it starts becoming a place of like, oh, okay, like I'm human. My humanness opens me up to my neediness. My neediness opens me up to the gospel, to you, to the church.
Great.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well,
sorry about that. That feels like a long.
No, that's good.
That's good. I think in some ways, already you answered the question how the gospel speaks to our shame. And so I'll put you and Brad on the spot, give you guys each 1 minute to answer the question. How do you think the gospel speaks to our shame, promotes healing? Todd, we'll let you go first, and then Brad, you fire away.
Shame simply says, I need something greater in myself to restore me to sanity. I cannot restore my sanity, and nothing I turn to outside of the gospel will restore me to who I actually am. That's how I'd say it.
Good. Brad, he did his in about 10 seconds. So.
Yeah, gotta follow
Brad,
that.
I've had way more practice to do this.
Yeah. I think so. The gospel seeks to shame the parts about you that you don't like, that you're afraid of being exposed. God knows better than you do, and still sent his son to the cross. So God's love and acceptance of us, his attachment to us, to use the language from earlier, is not dependent upon or shifted around because of our limitations or what we're good at or what we're not good at or our sin, but it's dependent upon what Christ did on the cross. So I think that allows us to be open about our limitations and not fear exposure, because those things don't change God's view of us.
Good.
Amen. That's so good. That's a better definition of mine, bro. I'll give you it. Can you type that out when we're done and send it to me? I'll put that
Todd, thanks so much for joining us and for talking through this. Super helpful. I think we could have done hours of this conversation, and I would have enjoyed it and gotten so much out of it. So like Rick and I said, both of us have gone through Tin Man and benefited greatly. We've sent a lot of our people to Tin Man as well and see it as so valuable and helpful. So if you're listening to this, and earlier Todd said, my life isn't working, and that's usually why people come to you. If you're listening to this and you're like, my life isn't working, and this stuff sounds like it might help it start working, then we would encourage you to reach out to Tin Man. We'll post their website and some contact information in the show notes. But Todd, I believe it's tinmanministries.org. Is that the right? You are, yeah. Todd's not the only coach there. There's 30-ish, 35-ish other coaches, both men and women, who have various life experiences, but who have all been trained in kind of this similar approach to dealing with emotions and shame. Todd, could you just briefly speak to kind of the mission of Tin Man? You mentioned earlier finding your way back to your heart, and I've heard that spiel before, but just kind of give like an overview of what Tin Man is, and maybe any more comments about how we can find you if we need to.
Yeah, so the ultimate mission of Tin Man is this. We want to wash the feet of those who are washing the feet of others. That means we want to come alongside of men and women who know the gospel or don't know the gospel, but want better for their life. And so we want to come alongside them to help them do that. That meaning that, hey, God created each of us in unique ways, and therefore God's created us to do things in unique ways. And so oftentimes we're trying to do things rather than be things. So we want to help people get back to their being so they can go do the doing. So that's how we would say that. So if your life is in a place that you're like, man, I want more out of my life, not even that it's not working, but you find this place of emptiness, this place of longing, this place of like, hey, I'm just not experiencing a full life the way Jesus talks about in John 10:10. We want to help you do that. We want to help find what's going on in your life, your hearts, that's keeping you or blocking you from living a full and abundant life. So your life might be working, but it's not working to the full, or your life might be working at all. We'll come alongside each of you. Any kind of addiction we'll help you with, any kind of anxiety, depression, any of that kind of thing, we'll come and walk with you. The best way to get a hold of us is, and this is true for everyone that will come to Tin Man, if you will email info@tinman.life or jordan@tinman.life. So every client or every person that comes to Tin Man, they get a 15-minute, 20-minute free consultation evaluation. That's for us to hear your story, to see. It's kind of what I did with both of you guys at the initial thing. And then Jordan knows all of our coaches, and Jordan will place you with who he believes is the best fit for you. And so that's kind of the best way. Jordan@tinman.life. Get on a 15, 20-minute intake call with him. It's on us, on the house, to get to know you and then to place you.
Awesome. Great. That's great. Yeah, thanks again, Todd. Just a reminder, everyone, we're going to do a Q&A at the end of this season. So if you have any questions, and especially questions about shame or anything that we've been talking about, go ahead and email those to the email address in the show notes, or post it in a comment in a review or something like that, and we'll try to tackle those at the end of the season. Thanks for being with us on this episode of Saints in Society, and we'll catch you next time.